My name is Althea Corbyn, 71 years old, retired librarian, and, until recently, a tenant in my daughter's backyard. The carriage studio behind her Fort Collins home was small but warm enough sunlight through the single east window, the smell of pine floors I'd refinished myself. I'd been paying $1,600 a month toward her mortgage, an arrangement we called temporary when it began 5 years ago. Like most temporary things, it turned permanent before anyone noticed. That evening, we had dinner in the main house, just the two of us. The roast chicken was drying under the kitchen lights, and Kendra was talking fast, her fork clinking against her plate. "The gas bill went up again," she said, "and the property tax adjustment hit. I don't know how I'm supposed to keep up." I'd heard this rhythm before the sigh, the numbers, the pause where she waited for me to volunteer. I poured a little more gravy on my plate instead. When Kendra divorced, she was frightened of losing everything. I remember signing the loan papers beside her, my name added to the mortgage, her hand shaking. She promised she'd refinance within a year. I never pressed her when that year came and went. She had a good job then, a daughter in high school, too much pride to ask for help, but not enough to refuse it when offered. Now she looked at me across the table, her tone sharper. "Maybe if you could help a little more this month, just until I sort the taxes." I set down my knife. "Kendra, I already send the mortgage payment on the 1st. That was our deal." She opened her mouth, then closed it. The air thinned between us, carrying the faint hum of the refrigerator. I could almost see her biting back the words she really wanted to say. Dinner ended without dessert. I gathered the dishes, rinsed them in silence, and felt her footsteps retreat down the hall. Through the kitchen window, I could see the lights of my studio flicker to life. It looked small from a distance, like something waiting to be let go. By morning, I would realize that the distance had already begun to grow, one quiet dinner at a time, until a single sentence would make it final. The next morning began like any other, a soft clatter of dishes from the main house, the smell of coffee drifting through my open window. I had promised myself a quiet day, maybe a walk by the river before the heat came. But quiet never lasts long in a house where money has become the main language. Kendra called out before I reached the back steps. "Mom, can you come here a minute?" Her voice carried that tight edge I'd learned to recognize the sound of something already broken. She stood by the counter, phone in hand, the screen glowing with an online form. "The roof needs repair," she said quickly. I took out a small personal loan. "It's nothing big, but I'll need help with the first payment until I get my bonus." I took a breath, steady but sharp. "You didn't mention a loan. It was urgent," she said, setting the phone down. "The contractor already started." I looked at her, at the same eyes that once begged me to sign a mortgage paper, the same hands that now trembled around a mug. "Kendra, I can't keep covering for every decision you make without me. I've done my part." Her jaw tightened. "So that's it. You just stop helping when things get hard." "I'm not stopping, love," I said quietly. "I'm stopping rescue." For a moment, she said nothing. Then her face flushed anger, fear, maybe both. "You know what, Mom? If it's so unbearable, just get out. Get out and never come back." The words came out raw, unplanned, but final. They hung between us, louder than the silence that followed. I didn't answer. I only nodded once, turned toward the back door, and walked across the yard. My heart felt oddly steady, as if it had known this would come. That night, I packed my life into 2 suitcases, clothes, my checkbook, the folders that held every record of the mortgage payments I'd made. I left the lamp on, casting long shadows over the tidy little space that had once felt like safety. Outside, the air was cool and still. I locked the door behind me, the click small but absolute, and carried my bags to the car before the dawn had a chance to change my mind. The morning air was pale and thin, the kind that carries no promises. I left the studio just after 6. The street still quiet, except for the hum of sprinklers and a dog barking 2 houses down. The garden I'd planted years ago, lavender, sage, and one stubborn rosebush was heavy with dew. I bent down and touched a single petal, as if it could remember me. Then I slid the house key onto the counter inside, beside a half-burned candle and the note I didn't have the heart to write. The car started on the first try. My hands shook on the wheel as I backed out. Not from fear, but from the weight of everything I was finally putting down. The driveway gravel cracked beneath the tires, and when I turned onto the street, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Billy Hart lived 15 minutes away, near College Avenue, in a bungalow that leaned slightly to the left, as if time had nudged it too often. Billy and I had worked together at the public library before retirement. She greeted me in her robe, hair pinned up with a pencil, a familiar comfort. "Bad morning," she asked gently. "Final one," I said. She stepped aside and waved me in. The house smelled of lemon polish and sleep. Her cat, Simon, blinked at me from the arm of the couch I'd soon be calling home. Billy didn't ask for details. She just made tea, poured it into 2 mismatched mugs, and sat beside me. "I remember the night my son told me to leave," she said after a moment. "I thought I'd die of shame. Turns out I just needed new walls." I nodded, unable to speak. Her words landed softly, like a map I could finally read. That night, I lay on the couch under a faded quilt, the city lights flickering through thin curtains. Before sleeping, I opened my phone, pulled up the bank app, and canceled the automatic transfer that had gone out on the 1st of every month for 5 years. The confirmation screen blinked twice, then disappeared. In the silence that followed, I felt grief fold into something quieter space. Maybe, or air, at last. By the end of the week, the shock had thinned into practicality. Billy slipped me the number of an attorney she'd once used, Maud Ellery, a woman in her late 50s with a calm voice and an office that smelled faintly of eucalyptus and ink. Maud listened without interrupting as I explained what had happened. The outburst, the payments, the mortgage still in both our names. Her eyes softened, but her tone stayed firm. "You did right to leave," she said. "Now we make sure you're protected." She drafted a short, precise statement. No emotion, just fact. It documented that I'd been verbally evicted on March 3rd, that all funds I'd contributed were voluntary gifts linked to my right of residence, and that I no longer occupied or held responsibility for the property. When she handed it to me for review, my hands were steady for the first time in days. Next, she advised closing the joint savings account I'd kept with Kendra since the refinancing. At the credit union downtown, the teller recognized me. "Leaving the shared account, Ms. Corbyn?" she asked quietly, scanning her monitor. "Yes," I said. "Please remove me as cosigner." She nodded and turned the screen toward me. The digital form glowed blue against the glass partition. I signed my name, slow and deliberate. When it was done, the teller slid a printed confirmation across the counter. "I hope everything works out," she said, her tone kind but careful, the way people speak when they sense the ground shifting beneath someone else's feet. Outside, the spring air carried the faint scent of wet pavement and early blossoms. I folded the paperwork into my bag beside Maud's letter and paused at the curb before crossing. Cars passed, each heading somewhere known. For the first time in years, I wasn't tied to any address but my own name. The sound of traffic was oddly steady, like the turning of a page. The messages started 3 days after I signed the last paper. At first, they were polite, Kendra's voice soft, almost rehearsed. "Mom, I know things got heated. I just need a little help catching up this month. We can talk, right?" Then the tone shifted. Voicemails piled up, pleading 1 minute, angry the next. "You've turned your back on your own family. How can you live with that?" I stopped answering. but silence only seemed to sharpen her words. Each buzz from my phone carried a small ache, a pull between guilt and peace. One afternoon, my cousin Irene called from Denver. "I hate being in the middle," she began carefully, "but Kendra mentioned you've stopped helping with the mortgage. People are talking, saying you just walked away." I thanked her for calling, kept my voice even, and changed the subject to her garden. When we hung up, I sat still for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum. The rumor mill had begun its slow spin, and my daughter's hurt was feeding it. That evening, while I washed dishes, I overheard Billy on the phone with her son. Her voice trembled between love and exhaustion. "I can't send more money, honey. I just can't." A long pause followed. Then the low thud of her setting the receiver down. She caught my eye and smiled sadly. "They always think we've got more to give." I nodded, drying a plate that didn't need drying. We didn't speak again, but the silence between us was understanding, not emptiness. The next morning, I went walking along the Cache-la-Poudre River. The air was cool, the water restless. My thoughts swirled with it. Memories of bedtime stories, school concerts, every check I'd ever written with a mother's hope hidden in the memo line. By a bend in the trail, I spotted a smooth gray stone half buried in the sand. I picked it up, felt its steady weight in my palm, and slipped it into my pocket. It was cold, simple, real, something that didn't ask to be rescued or explained. When I turned back toward the road, the sound of the river followed me, steady as breath. A month after leaving Kendra's house, I signed the lease on a one-bedroom apartment at a senior co-housing community near City Park. The building was an old brick structure with a shared garden, a bench under a cottonwood tree, and neighbors who waved without asking questions. When the manager handed me my keys, I felt the weight of them settle into my palm like proof that I still belonged somewhere. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and wood polish. I unpacked slowly, one box at a time, careful not to fill the space too quickly. My things looked smaller here, humbler, but in a way that made sense. On the kitchen counter, I placed the gray river stone beside my checkbook, its cool surface catching the morning light. By the following week, I had started a part-time job at the public library downtown. They didn't need a full librarian, just someone to restock shelves and help with the afternoon reading hour. I hadn't realized how much I missed the quiet shuffle of pages, the murmur of children tracing words with their fingers. When one little girl handed me a crayon drawing of a house with the word "home" scrawled beneath, I had to turn away for a moment before thanking her. Evenings became their own ritual. I brewed chamomile tea, opened the window to let the wind in from City Park, and watched the sun slide behind the foothills. The days passed without urgency. No calls demanding money, no arguments bleeding into silence. Just the soft rhythm of a life reduced to what fit comfortably, sometimes. While balancing the library's old ledger or counting my hours, I'd glance at the stone beside me. Its surface had grown warmer, touched by sunlight and time. I traced its curve and thought about how something shaped by years of pressure could still be smooth, still endure. I didn't call Kendra, and she didn't call me. There was peace in that odd, fragile, but real. The quiet no longer felt empty. It simply sounded like mine. It was nearly 10 when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer at that hour. Calls rarely brought good news. Kendra's name lit the screen, and before I could draw a steady breath, her voice flooded through. "Mom, they're foreclosing. The bank sent a 30-day notice. You have to help me." The words tumbled over each other, tight and breathless. I could hear the panic behind them, the same tone she used as a child when she'd broken something she couldn't fix. I held the phone to my ear, listening to her cry, to the sound of her pacing. They said, if we don't make the payment, we'll lose the house. I thought you were still sending the money. I stopped. Kendra, I said quietly. I told you when I left my support ended with my stay. Her voice cracked. Why would you do that? You knew the mortgage was still in your name. You can't just walk away from family. I stared at the small stone on my desk, its gray surface calm beneath the lamplight. I didn't walk away, I said. I stepped back. There was a silence. Then the sharp sound of her swallowing tears. Please, Mom, just this once. If you'd help cover the month, I'll figure out the rest. I promise. I could feel the ache of her words pressing through the line. But the decision had already been made long ago. One quiet morning when I locked the studio door. Let's meet tomorrow, I said. We'll talk in person. Kendra agreed, her voice small, almost a whisper. When the call ended, the room fell into a stillness so deep it felt physical. I sat for a while, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Before bed, I took out my shoes and polished them, an old habit from my working years. The motions steadied me the slow circles, the soft shine spreading beneath my hand. I laid out my jacket, rehearsed calm answers in my mind, and tried not to think about the cafe or the conversation waiting there, outside. The night pressed against the window, heavy and expectant. The cafe on Laurel Street was already crowded when I arrived, a low murmur of conversation blending with the hiss of the espresso machine. The air smelled of roasted beans and rain from the storm that had passed earlier. I chose a corner table near the window, the one with a wobbly leg I steadied out of habit. My shoes still shone from the polish the night before. Kendra came in 10 minutes later, wrapped in a gray coat that made her look smaller than I remembered. She spotted me quickly, hesitated by the counter, then walked over with the stiffness of someone preparing for an argument. Thank you for meeting me, she said, dropping her purse onto the chair. Her hands trembled as she pulled out a folded sheet, the foreclosure notice, already creased from worry. They're giving me 30 days. If we miss another payment, the bank takes the house. I waited until she sat down before speaking. You said you'd refinance after the first year, I reminded her gently. I couldn't, she shot back, voice rising over the cafe hum. You know how things went after the divorce. I had your help, and then you just stopped. You're my mother. How could you walk away? I reached into my bag and drew out a manila folder. Inside were copies of the transfers I'd made over the last 5 years, each one dated. Neat, undeniable. Beneath them was Maud Ellery's letter and the printed transcript of Kendra's text from the night she told me to leave. I laid them out one by one, keeping my movements slow. I didn't walk away. I said, you told me to leave. I did. And with me went the support tied to that roof. Her eyes filled before she could blink them dry. I didn't mean it, she whispered. I was angry. You know I say things I don't mean. I know, I said softly, but words build walls, Kendra. And sometimes they hold for a moment. Neither of us spoke. The barista called a name, cups clinked, and outside the rain began again, light and constant. I reached into my pocket and drew out the river stone, now smooth from my touch. I placed it on the table between us. This is all I can give you now, I said. Solid, not endless. Kendra's shoulders shook once, quietly. I stood, gathering my papers, and left her sitting there with the stone under her palm and the sound of rain filling the silence we'd both earned. By the time autumn arrived, the rhythm of my days had settled into something steady and kind. The windowsill above my small kitchen sink was crowded with terracotta pots basil. Thyme, a stubborn mint that refused to behave. Every morning, I misted them with a little spray bottle and watched the condensation roll down the glass, catching the first light over City Park. The quiet had become its own kind of music. The co-op had grown familiar, too. Neighbors drifted in and out, retired teachers, a widower who baked muffins every Saturday, a pair of sisters who argued about crossword clues in the lobby. They'd started bringing me small things, a jar of jam, a scarf, a note left by the door. The kindness was gentle, unspoken, the sort that expects nothing back. One afternoon, while checking mail, I ran into Mrs. Lang, who lived 2 doors down. She glanced at the return address on a letter in my hand. Lock, she read aloud, smiling faintly. Any relation to that lovely craftsman house off Prospect I heard? It's rented now. Nice couple with a baby. I nodded, the information settling over me like a mild wind. Yes, I said. My daughters. Mrs. Lang's smile softened. Good for her. It's a hard market. Back upstairs. I opened the letter, just a holiday card. Red foil and printed snowflakes. Wishing you warmth and health this season. No signature beyond Kendra. I read it twice, then tucked it beside my teacup, letting it rest there while the kettle hissed. That evening, I invited 2 neighbors for tea. We sat by the window, talking about the first frost and the migratory geese overhead. The air smelled faintly of mint and rain. When the conversation drifted into companionable silence, I reached for the river stone on the counter. It had dulled slightly over time, its edges worn smoother by my touch. I placed it on the shelf above my teacup, where the sunset caught its curved surface and made it glow pale gold. For a moment, the room felt weightless, the kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, but stays when everything else has gone. They had told me to leave my home, and somehow, in the quiet that followed, I found one inside myself.